Gentlemen, please come and take your seats. We are 4 minutes late. You owe me 4 minutes, which I will collect. Okay, folks, we are making progress. And if this was a real tour, we run a very tight ship, you need to understand. And I was not a sergeant major, but I can do this part if I have to. But no, I'm telling you, my job is time management. That's the essence of my job. Be there on time. So we have the luxury not to be that strict here, but on a tour, just the most unpleasant thing that can happen is that you come to a site as they close the gate because you were late. And it happens. So being on time is absolutely critical. Ladies and gentlemen, second day in Jerusalem. So we learned a little bit about the city. And day number 2 is going to take us to other parts of, let's call it biblical Jerusalem, in and around the old city. Because the next one will take us to the new city of Jerusalem to see the Israel Museum, the Holocaust Museum, and some other places as well. Today we're going to focus on some key locations, adding another layer to what we started yesterday or an hour ago. That's what we did yesterday. We started with the Mount of Olives. We went down to the Kidron into the city. Today the plan will be a little different. We're going to walk into the city from Jaffa Gate. We're going to the city of David. That's where the story begins. And then we're going to visit places like Hezekiah's tunnel, the pool of Siloam. That's where Jesus healed the blind man in John chapter 9, sent him down to the pool of Siloam from the temple's area. And we're going to see the excavations outside the Western Wall obviously. And then a quick tour on Temple Mount. Temple Mount is not a very pleasant place to visit, you need to understand. And even today, the Muslim guards are watching, they always question your motive. Why are you here? What are you doing here? So sometimes it can be unpleasant for groups as well. There used to be a time that school kids from Muslim schools used to come to Temple Mount and simply walk with a group of tourists and yell and scream and spit. Well, this is all over now because the police understood that if you want to show sovereignty, that could not carry on. But sometimes visiting Temple Mount can be an unpleasant experience, as some of you may have experienced when you were in Israel. So that's the map for today. And just to show you that the city of David is outside the walls today, but was within the walls of the city as it was back then. Let me show you a short illustration how the city of David used to look like. To remind you, we speak about a small town. We speak about a community of maybe 2,000 people at the most, located on the southern slope of Mount of Olives by the spring. The spring says over there the Gihon or Gihon spring. Just one word about that because the name Gihon should ring a bell to some of you. When you go to the second chapter in Genesis, verse 10, the Bible speaks about the Garden of Eden. The Bible says it's an area watered by 4 rivers. And it's mentioned the Tigris and the Euphrates, easy to identify. And then it speaks about the Gihon and the Pishon. Well, go figure. We don't really know where these places were, although the Bible gives us some idea. It's not the same Gihon as the one in Jerusalem, right? There's no connection between the Garden of Eden and Jerusalem. Gihon is a nature of a spring that comes out in pulses, all right? A couple of pulses every day will be the nature of it, so it speaks about a spring of a certain kind. That's the origin of the name. You do see over there the Jebusite wall, the one that David conquered. You see the palace in David's days. You even see the palace from Solomon's days. So this is the city from the days of Solomon. You see in the blue over here, you see Hezekiah's tunnel that we'll speak about in just a minute that empties into the pool of Siloam. The tunnel is underground, obviously, and it's an amazing water engineering accomplishment. I know the whole world is praising Rome for the aqueducts, etc. Wait until we speak about this project and how teams worked underground from both ends and met halfway without making a single error along the way under the pressure of the Assyrian army approaching Jerusalem. It is indeed an amazing accomplishment. You can walk through Hezekiah's tunnel if you are not afraid from tight places and you don't mind freezing cold water. It's always an experience, and I even did it for you, see later on, walking through a section of Hezekiah's tunnel. So that will be the city of David. And here is what the Bible tells us about the city of David. We spoke about it a little earlier. Until the days of King David, the place was called Jebus, it was called Salem, it was called the citadel of Zion. Ever since David conquered the place, it will be called the city of David. Something that you're going to hear now, I'm going to repeat what I shared with you in the last session.
City of David, as small as it is, was excavated more than any other place on the planet. You do understand the curiosity. And once the Ottoman Empire was more willing to accommodate Western European delegations, and was a growing involvement of Europe in Ottoman affairs, Jerusalem was an opportunity. And for that reason, team after team and scholar after scholar came to excavate the city. And sometimes too many details are adding confusion and not clarity necessarily. But Jerusalem has a history which is much longer than what we only told in the Bible. When they did excavations in the area, and when they looked at some other documents, most of them come from Egypt. The place was mentioned. In the 19th century BCE, there was a tradition among the Egyptian army, before they go to battle, to write the name of the enemy on small clay figurines and smash it down to the ground, hoping that this will happen to the enemy in the battlefield. Lo and behold, the name of Jerusalem was found, which meant that Jerusalem was important enough for the Egyptian pharaohs to pay attention to, and at least once the Egyptian army was marching up to Jerusalem to conquer the city. Now the city is not a place of strategic significance. It's not on the main highways. It's away from the trade routes or the coast. So the question was, what was so important about Jerusalem? And sometimes we have to say we're not really sure about why the Egyptians paid that much attention to conquer the place. We are given another opportunity to think about the importance of it in the letters of El Amarna. The entire archive of the Egyptian Foreign Office from the 14th century BCE was found in a place called El Amarna in Egypt. 381 clay tablets. Pharaoh is corresponding and writing to the kings that were under his authority, and one was the king of Jerusalem. So we know that Jerusalem had professional diplomats. We know that Jerusalem was important to the Egyptians, and all that is preceding the conquest in the days of Joshua. We are told in the book of Joshua, chapter 12, 31 cities Joshua conquered. Jerusalem was one of them. True, it was called Salem back then and not Jerusalem. We know that Melchizedek was king in this area. We also know that the tribe of Judah conquered the place. You go to Judges number 1. But we also know that the place remained in the hands of the local Jebusites. And that's confusing. The Bible said that the place...
Well, I did mention that already, and for the sake of saving time, I don't want to repeat too much of myself. I do want to show you some other things from the excavations in Jerusalem. The wall that you see on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, I'm sorry, it's kind of a mirror picture. Left-hand side over there is a section from the wall of the Jebusites. Let me remind you what the Bible says, and I'm asking a trivia question. I'm offering 10,000 points for a correct answer. The points are good for nothing. Who was the second king in Israel? Who was the second king in Israel? Yeah, well, if it was David, it wasn't tricky. Yes. I know that would be usually the answer, but this is the wrong answer. King Saul had a son. His name was Ishbosheth, and King Saul's son was king for 2 years. We always ignore him, go straight to David. David was the king of one tribe, the tribe of Judah, maybe Simeon, but the son of Saul was the king of 10 tribes, until he was murdered by his own people, and only then the elders of Israel go to Hebron to invite David to be their king. That's what the Bible tells us. So this young shepherd boy, not a mighty king yet, is making his way to Jerusalem. He's asking God, what shall I do? And God tells him clearly, you go and conquer Jebus. So you think about this young shepherd boy, not a mighty king yet, standing at the foot of the wall that you see over there, looking at the wall, thinking to himself, how on earth we are going to conquer that? And the Bible tells us that on top of the wall, the Jebusites are standing, mocking David, and telling him that the wall is so mighty that even the blind and the lame can protect the wall. Now you do know how the city was conquered. David's mighty general and nephew Joab was the one that climbed through the water shaft, the Bible says, and conquered the city from within. The Bible said that he conquered the citadel of Zion, but restored the city. Well, how do we to understand that? Because it's not easy to understand that statement over there. We know for a fact that David did not wipe out the local Jebusites. Basically, David invited them to be part of his society, making one demand, basically. You need to worship the God of Israel, and if you're willing to do so, I'm going to accommodate you into my society. Let me prove it to you. Uriah, remember the name? a mighty warrior. Uriah is not a name, by the way, it's a title. So is Bathsheba, so is Goliath. These are not names of people, these are titles, all right? Goliath means a professional warrior. That's what it means. Bathsheba, the daughter of the nobleman. Uriah, the warrior. So Uriah is sent to his death, basically. But he's coming home after David sinned with the wife, and David tells him, young man, go and see your wife. What is Uriah's answer? No, not as long as the ark of God is in a tent in the battlefield. What did he kill? The man was a Hittite. Unless we begin to see how the local Jebusites are willing to accept the God of Israel to be integrated into the Israelite society. Bathsheba was not an Israelite woman. All right? Bathsheba means the daughter of the nobleman, and most likely she was a Jebusite. And after David promised her that Solomon is going to be the next king, no doubt that many people did not like the idea, because Solomon was the son of a non-Israelite. Adoniah, next in line, after the death of Amnon and Absalom, was the son of an Israelite woman. So when David is on his deathbed, Adoniah celebrates, he's next in line. He is the legitimate king, not Solomon. Well, David promised, God promised, and therefore Solomon got the throne basically. But it was not his turn. And for that reason, the Bible says when David is about to die, Adoniah celebrates, and there was confusion in the kingdom. The high priest, Zadok, is standing by the deathbed and asking the king, Mr. King, tell us, who is going to be your heir? And Bathsheba is standing there as well. You promised me, you promised me. We speak about a real crisis in the kingdom's life, and David says in his last breath, it will be Solomon. So they mount the young prince on David's mule. The mighty king of Israel was not mounted on a horse. He was mounted on a mule. What's wrong with horses? When the Bible speaks about the king of the Hebrews in Deuteronomy 17, the Bible says clearly he would not possess horses. So David obeyed and conquered. His son Solomon, that had the state of an art of an army, with 1,400 chariots and 4,200 horses, lost everything that David conquered for him. Well, here's a lesson for you about obeying God's instructions and orders. So Solomon was brought down to the spring to be made king. So that will be the succession between one king to the other, and Adoniah lost the race and lost his life as well. We'll touch on that in just a minute. So that's how the city used to look like, and these are the walls of Jabez that you see in front of you, the walls that basically David conquered. Just to complete what I started a minute ago, we are told that when David was ordered to purchase the threshing floor from Araunah, you all know the story, I believe. Let me repeat it very quickly. The last chapter of 2 Samuel. David had sinned, and not for the first time, as you'll remember. And after he repented, God told him basically, go up and purchase the place. David sent Joab to count the fighting men around the kingdom. And Joab tells him, don't do that. What's the problem in counting people? If you're counting people, you're questioning God's promise to Abraham to multiply his offspring as the dust along the seashores. Don't count people. Don't try to understand how blessed you are. Let's be practical for a minute. The king needs to know how many people are in the kingdom for many reasons. Well, every man in Israel was paying his taxes to the temple, half a shekel. Count the coins. Count the coins. Do not count people. And therefore David had sinned, and he was punished, and the angel of the Lord came to destroy the kingdom. We always ignore that, but the angel killed 75,000 Israelites until he came to destroy Jerusalem, rested on top of the threshing floor, and God said, behold. And then David was ordered by Nathan to climb the hill, conquer the place. This will be the place that God chose for his everlasting name. That's where Solomon will build the temple. I'm not making up any of it. Some of you look at me with shock and terror. Please go to the last chapters of 2 Samuel. The whole thing is there. Now the Bible tells us something else very important. And I'm quoting now the Hebrew Bible, okay? It says that when David was climbing up to purchase the threshing floor from Araunah, the Jebusite, they had a negotiation. And Araunah says, well, you're the king, you can have it for free. David says, no, I'm not going to offer sacrifice in a place I did not purchase for my God. And then the Bible says in the Hebrew text, and many other things, the king offered the king. How many kings are there? Well, the Bible speaks about two kings negotiating. We know David. Who's the other one? Well, Araunah is not a name either. Araunah is a title, the ruler. So let me make a suggestion, all right? Hypothetically, opinion, whatever you want to do with it. Is it possible that Araunah was the king of Jebus that David made a deal with? I'm going to let you live. If you're willing to accept my God and be part of my society, it's an opportunity. in my opinion, just my opinion, wrote a paper about it. My professor was very happy. I gave you a big compliment. We spoke about the tablets of El Amarna. We spoke about learned people in Jerusalem. We spoke about professional diplomats. The Israelites did not master those skills. I'm sorry to tell you, David, as a young shepherd boy, was illiterate as most everybody else in the kingdom. You're going to found a kingdom. You're going to make yourself a regional ruler. You need to have the skills that you don't master. What about speaking languages? What about writing letters? What about understanding diplomacy? Well, the Jebusites were experts in that. We read about them in the letters of El Amarna. We speak about learned people. Is it possible it was a trade-off? I'll let you live. If you teach my people how to be the bookkeepers, how to be the tax collectors, how to speak languages, how to be diplomats, and you have to accept my God and worship him. Possibility. We know for a fact, David did not wipe out the Jebusites. It's a problem. Because Joshua was commanded to wipe out everybody, including the Jebusites. Joshua disobeyed, and David disobeyed. That's what the Bible says very clearly. So we speak about two societies, basically, are coming together to create, if you wish, the future Israelite society. Because Solomon's mother was not an Israelite. All right? Today, the religion goes through the mother. Back then, that was not the case yet. When they did the excavations in this area, they found the whole quarter of the palace. They found 51 seals, or the impressions of seals, and my English is not good enough to explain that. But back at the time, every official had like a ring with his coat of arms or emblem on it. And whenever he wrote a document, they will drip some wax, just like today, and they will stamp the seal in the wax. If you want to open it, you have to break it. That was a sign that somebody was reading your letter. Well, the parchment was gone, but these seals were found. 51 names that we know from the scriptures. Officials in the days of King Hezekiah. Officials from the days of Jeremiah. Do you understand the excitement here? You find this bundle of seals and you start figuring out the names and you say, hey, that's familiar, it's in the scriptures. And you go and you find those matches. That's what led the archaeologists to believe that this was indeed the center of administration or David's palace. There is an archaeologist, she passed away 2 years ago, Eilat Mazar. She was convinced that she found the palace of David, and she made her assumption based on what was found in the area, a large building on top of the hill with all those manifestations of government could only indicate one thing, most likely the palace of David. By the way, when you come to Jerusalem and you stand on top of the city of David, the slopes are so steep you can see down below you every single rooftop. Guess how David saw Bathsheba bathing on the rooftop one afternoon? You can simply see that because of the city's topography. So tell me now that topography is boring, huh? So when you're standing there and you can see all the roofs down, you say, well, that's how it happened. So the king's palace was always on top of the hill, and all the city was basically on 3 hillsides that were meant to 3 different directions. Let me bring up this one.
It's not easy to be impressed today when you see basically ruins. But you can't get any closer to what the Bible tells us than to look at those ruins in front of you. That's how the prophet Isaiah delivered his prophecies, and that's how the prophet Jeremiah gave his messages. Almost everything that the Bible tells us when we speak about the days of the Old Testament, let alone the kingdom of Judah, took place in Jerusalem. And those stones in front of you have an amazing story to tell. It was either an indication that the standard of living was higher than average. A stone was found over there with a hole in it. You can easily guess what that stone was for. You're absolutely right, lavatories. Think about people having a sense of hygiene more than 2,500 years ago and how important that was. But it teaches us something else. They checked the waste outside to try to see what kind of foods people ate in Jerusalem back then. And lo and behold, they found a lot of fish bones. Now, Jerusalem is quite away from the Mediterranean Sea. So that must indicate a rich trade that the city was engaged in. We do know from the book of Nehemiah, centuries later on, that Nehemiah had to battle the Phoenician merchants. They came from the sea to do business on the Sabbath day outside the walls of Jerusalem. So that was long before that. But the fact that the city is away from the sea, once you proclaim it as capital, and you make it a metropolis that will have its political significance and a commercial one as well, you can identify by looking at the local ceramics and by even trying to figure out what people ate in the area. That will tell you a lot. about how rich was the trade between Jerusalem and the whole region.
By the way, and this is interesting, what archaeologists do is going through people's garbage. I don't mean to be disrespectful, because things of value you don't throw away, you keep them with you. It goes in the family, coins and gold, etc. You have a chance to look through people's garbage. Think about how many things somebody can learn about your garbage. Just to view that, and I'm not being disrespectful to anybody, okay, my garbage, okay? They can learn so much about the whole society simply by looking at the things that we eat, we throw away. So that's what they do. I don't tell them because it sounds offensive, all right? But basically, they're looking through things that nobody wanted back at the time and simply got rid of it. So that can teach quite a lot. So speaking about the city of David, there's not a lot to see, but when you look at the stones, and you think about it, David was standing right here, and he saw the very same thing, that'll be quite excitement. You go into the bedrock, literally, and you come to the spring. And let's look at the spring of Jerusalem. You hear the running water.
Water, so trivial to most of us. Well, the biggest challenge in the ancient days, especially in an arid area like Israel or Jerusalem. True, we have about 20 to 25 inches of rainfall every year, but back in the old days, people did not know how to collect rainwater, how to build aqueducts. You are dependent on the spring, literally on the spring. And therefore, you have to live within a decent walking distance and go daily down to the water source to collect water to go back home. And by the way, since water was so precious, there was a water commissioner. You don't just go down for yourself and take as much water as you want. There was some kind of rationing. You only take what you need. Here in Jerusalem, the one and only water source is a spring of Gihon or Gihon. Annual flow, about 500,000 cubic meters of water, and that will be hardly enough to sustain a community of about 1,500 people at the most. It wasn't just taking water home to wash or to do your laundry, it was also for irrigation, industry. And therefore water was the main thing to consider. It was indeed a source of life. So no wonder why a most important political act of a king's life, his anointment and his coronation, will take place by the spring, the source of life. The Bible tells us when David was on his deathbed, they took his young son Solomon, mounted on David's mule, and led him down to the spring, and he was anointed by the spring. Yes, we do speak about maybes and most likelies and traditional places. No tradition about that. I can tell you beyond any doubt that Solomon was coming down that way, and that's where the priest Zadok anointed him to be king, right here. How exciting it is to be able to say 3,000 years later, we know not just the general area, we know the very place. And therefore, to go down to the water source, the spring of Gihon, you're going back down to the source of life, to the city. Without this spring, there was no Jerusalem. For a long time, that was the one and only water source, and the city could not grow beyond the annual flow of it until people learned how to collect rainwater, how to dig cisterns, how to collect flash flood water, and then the city can start growing.
Fasting forward 300 years, the days of King Hezekiah, one of the mightiest kings of Judah, not a great political success, if I may say so. The Bible says so as well. Hezekiah was leading a rebellion against the Assyrians, and he was the leader of a coalition. He was recruiting other kings in the area. We speak about a certain time in Assyria's history, the mighty empire, that there was an issue with succession. King Sargon II was killed in battle. They never found his body, and there was a big struggle among his sons, who will take the throne. And whenever the empires were involved in civil war, all the local kingdoms thought it's an opportunity to rebel, including Judah. So Hezekiah was the one behind this big conspiracy, and he had to prepare the city for war. The city was not prepared for war, because the spring outside was not protected. That thought in mind, Hezekiah was building a tunnel, basically, to carry the water from outside the city into a new water reservoir that will be the pool of Siloam. Of course, the spring was well camouflaged, and for many years nobody knew where the spring was flowing, basically. Everybody thought that the destination, the pool of Siloam, is also the spring. But this was an amazing water project. I just want to give you some of the data. If you would like to read it, that's the biblical references. Nope. Anyhow, let me just give you some of the information. I'm missing a slide here. Nobody can explain today how it was done. But we do know that two teams worked from both ends, all right? And they met halfway. The problem wasn't meeting. The problem was maintaining the same slope. Now, the spring is only, I use the metric system, 30 centimeters higher than the pool of Siloam, which means that the slope is 0.06. Now, you tell me what kind of tools or machinery engineers were using 2,700 years ago to maintain that slope. And although as a crow flies, it's only 330 meters long, the tunnel, just to maintain the slope, is 538 meters long. So this was another accomplishment, if you wish, of water engineering, and they are working sometimes under more than 50 feet of bedrock, sometimes 100, and sometimes very close to the surface, but the job was done. And by the time the Assyrian army arrives, as the Bible tells us, everything was ready, and the city was basically saved through Hezekiah, took a real hit from the Assyrians, and most of the kingdom was devastated, including 200,000 people were exiled. We have a fascinating document given to us by the king of Assyria, Sennacherib. It was found in his palace in Nineveh, in northern Iraq of today, and he says the following: I attacked Hezekiah, the king of Judah. I seized 46 cities, and I locked him like a bird in a cage in his capital, Jerusalem. The Bible tells us about Jerusalem, the siege, and what happened outside the walls when the angel of the Lord was striking down the Assyrian army. So Jerusalem was not conquered, but the rest of the city was, the rest of the kingdom was in a shameful condition.
Well, walking through Hezekiah's tunnel is always an amazing experience. You see, the ceiling is about 15 feet above me, and look how narrow is the tunnel. Getting closer now to the exit, water flows very slowly from the spring, which is about 600 yards away from here, to fill up the pool. And there is daylight. And right here, they found in 1880 an inscription that describes the moment that the two teams met. It was not the meeting point, but that's where they built that. The question is why? It's so hidden. Nobody will see that. If you want to glorify the builders for the major effort, you should do that in a public place. But they did not. It was carved out, broken in the process, and now it's in the museum in Istanbul in Turkey.
Well, that's how the inscription looks like, the Hezekiah style inscription. And you read some of the data over there, which is really amazing about the details and the hard work of the engineers. I'm going to fast forward, with your permission, just a little bit because the clock is ticking. We finished our visit to the city of David, and now we are climbing up to Mount Moriah, getting closer to the excavations outside the Western Wall. They found a lot of amazing stuff outside the Western Wall, and this is from the model that I mentioned earlier. You're basically walking along, today you can't do that, along the old streets of Jerusalem under living quarters, and you find yourself standing basically outside the southern wall, the western wall, outside a complex called Temple Mount. Let me just say the Temple Mount is the largest man-made complex ever built, ever, around the world, all right? It's about 36 acres in size, an amazing engineering accomplishment that we're going to touch on in a few minutes.
Herod the Great was king for almost 20 years when he felt strong enough and wealthy enough to ask permission from the Jewish elders, the Sanhedrin, to renovate the temple's area. What was his motivation? Well, Josephus Flavius, the historian that tells us about those eras, will speak about the money issue, will speak about Herod's motivation to be recognized as the head of the whole Jewish people, not just king of Judea. And you need to know that even back then, about half of the Jewish people did not live in Judea. If you make Jerusalem so beautiful, if you build a structure that was something that nobody had ever seen in the country, that will maybe fortify your position as a leader of the Jews and not just the king of Judea.
Well, it wasn't just to build Temple Mount. To build Temple Mount without all the infrastructure would be like building a stadium without a single parking spot. So the whole city basically changed its appearance totally as a result of that project of Temple Mount. We speak about access roads, and we speak about bridges, and we speak about cleansing facilities for the people, because once you come to the temple, you want to bring yourself to the highest level of purity. And the way to do that was to use the ashes of the red cow once again. And we'll speak about the whole procedure in just a minute. So how long did it take to build Temple Mount? We don't really know. When Jesus says that he's going to destroy and rebuild the temple in 3 days, people tell him in the Gospel of John, 2nd chapter, we are working for 46 years, we did not finish yet. How can you do that possibly in 3 days? Which means Herod started the project, but he died long before this project was completed. So Temple Mount is one thing, the infrastructure around is another thing. But if you took a bird's view of the mountains of Jerusalem back then, you would see rivers of people coming from every corner of the world, literally speaking, on the way to Jerusalem. The city was not big enough to accommodate everybody, and therefore topography helped. The idea was that you are seated on the slopes, looking down to the arena. And what was the floor of the arena? The temple. Because you can only celebrate Passover, tradition, not in the Bible, as you have an eye contact with the temple. Which means the whole topography had to be considered. And Josephus Flavius tells us that one Passover, they offered 250,000 lambs. That's a lamb for a family. We speak about millions. Think about the efforts to build a city large enough to accommodate that many people, and think about being a moneymaker. It's not something to be ashamed of, and Josephus says very clearly that's what went through Herod's mind as well when he thought about the temple and how to build it. Look now at the building as you find it today on the model, right in the museum that we're going to speak about the next hour. That will be the temple's complex in front of you. And you do see there was a whole box, or the man-made box that buries under it Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is a mountain. It's the mountaintop slopes. You don't see that. Everything is covered by retaining walls and a huge platform. That's Temple Mount. And therefore, we cannot speak about Temple Mount before the days of Herod. In David's days, there was Mount Moriah and the rock. In Solomon's days, Mount Moriah and the temple building. But Temple Mount, as a huge complex with huge retaining walls, is the one built in the days of Herod. That's what Jesus saw when he prophesied his destruction from the Mount of Olives. That would be the facade of the building and the whole complex. Some data about the temple, it's quite amazing to read about the sizes of it. One of the stones over there, the second largest stone in the world, right, weighs about 500 tons. How do you move that? How do you convey it from place to place? A Roman crane could lift 50 tons. We speak about 10 cranes that have to work in concert. And if you don't pull the stone up at the same tenth of a second, it will not work. And therefore we speak about lots of skills. There was a division of 10,000 people, stonemasons, that Herod trained specifically for the job, and their children, because it went on decade by decade. If you read the amount of stone that was carved out, just some of the figures over there, it's quite amazing to think about the amount of efforts and money that was dedicated by a king that was not really Jewish. Herod never visited Temple Mount. He was not permitted to. Amazing. You dedicate that much money, but you're not permitted to go into the limited area for the Jews because you were not a Jew yourself. So we do speak about something quite puzzling, why to make that huge effort. Now look at that. Look at this kind of a close-up at the level of precision.
Well, one will have to admire the level of precision that those stonemasons did accomplish. When you look at the stones, how well they stand one above the other. You can hardly tell where a stone ends and another one begins. You're also noticing there is no connecting material between those stones. And the question is why? Well, the answer is that in order to make mortar, in order to use that as a connecting material, you have to burn a lot of limestone. In order to burn a lot of limestone, you need a lot of timber. Israel doesn't have that amount of timber. So the compromise or the solution was to use big blocks. The biggest one and the heaviest one in the wall weighs close to 500 tons, which is the second largest and the second heaviest stone in the world. And you have to level the bedrock totally, which means that in the process of building those massive retaining walls, from Solomon Temple or Herod engineers, in the process, in building those massive retaining walls, Herod engineers had to clean everything they found all the way down to the bedrock, including what was still standing there from the days of Solomon. From Solomon's temple, not a single stone was found. And the reason was that Herod's engineers would not build on ruins. Herod's engineers will level the bedrock. In the process of getting there, they simply removed everything, including the stuff from Solomon's temple.
Let me try to impress you once again with my drawing skills. Here's what I'm trying to point at. You do see the black line that goes with an angle. That will be the bedrock, right? That's a mountain. That's a natural mountain face. You want to build a platform. How do you bridge the gap between the platform and the bedrock? One way is to build this man-made box around, stuff it with dirt, tighten it, make a nice platform, and that's how you build your man-made box. If you do that, since there was no connecting material, the pressure of thousands and millions of people on it may be so harsh that the walls may collapse, basically. And therefore, as a defensive measure, there was a certain way to build the mountain, and let me show you right away how was it built. We spoke about that, and that's what I'm trying to show you. Basically, Temple Mount is a hollow mountain, a system of arches, one above the other, until you level the mountain top. That's where the temple used to be. And if you look through the western wall, which you cannot, that's what you see on the other side. So you see the retaining walls, but you don't know how it looks on the other side. That's how it looks like. Huge arches, one above the other. The mountain basically is hollow. And the question is why? 3 reasons. Number 1, think about storage. The temple needed lots of storage. It had living quarters. The priesthood was divided to 24 divisions, and each division came to the temple once a year for 2 weeks, and they lived there. So you need living quarters, which means you need storage, you need water systems. Any idea how much water you need just to clear the altar from the sacrificial blood every day? So these hollow spaces were used for storage and were used for water systems as well. Another reason was to reduce the pressure. You reduce the pressure from the retaining walls by building those arches. But number 3 was the most important one, the issue of purity once again. Temple Mount was supposed to be the purest place in the whole world. People had to cleanse themselves before they go up to Temple Mount. But here was a problem that the Bible is not touching on, but traditions. What if somebody was buried on the slopes of Temple Mount long before David purchased the place? The dead bones down there under the whole complex, they may defile the whole mountain. And since the mountain has to be the purest possible, you need to check with the commentators what will be a solution. Well, here is the loophole in the system once again. This impurity of dead bones is only traveling, so to speak, through solid rock and not through air. So if you have some air between the bedrock and when people are celebrating, that's okay. I can show you in Jerusalem today. Buildings are built on columns just because once upon a time it was a burial area, and for the sake of keeping people pure, if you wish, you need to have some air between living quarters and what used to be old burial places. I can show a place in Jerusalem, the whole road is built on arches just because it's crossing what might have been in the past an old graveyard. So purity is a major issue until this very day. And the way to bring yourself to the highest level of purity was to use the ashes of the red cow. But we don't have those ashes anymore because we don't have a red cow anymore, which means you cannot bring yourself to the highest level of purity. And for that reason, Jewish people don't go up to Temple Mount because you may defile the whole mountain. I shouldn't say Jewish people. Jewish people that follow rabbinical commentary and rabbis' orders will not do that because we are not as pure as we need to be, and our very presence on top of Temple Mount without the ashes of the red heifer, we may defile the whole mountain. I know it sounds ridiculous. The question is, who cares about these nonsense? Well, many people, that's how they live their lives. They do care. They do care to do everything by the law, if possible, or by the commentary. So how do you move the stones and how you place them so well one above the other? Here was an idea. When they scanned the wall, and they scanned it with infrared and ultrasound, you name it, they found between every 2 big stones many pieces of lead. And that led them to the following theory. It's a theory. On top of every large stone, they place hundreds of small balls made of lead. You bring the next stone to the construction site, you lift it up with a crane, very slowly you lower it, and it's now standing on these balls. You can still move it right and left. Because without that, if you misplace the stone, oops, it's gone. You cannot remove it. But now you can. So you move the stone until it comes to the final position, and the next one will crash them. So between every 2 large stones, that's what they found, which led them to the theory that maybe that's how they accomplished this level of precision, which is absolutely amazing. This is just impossible that they did that and still standing. With all the disasters and earthquakes and wars, it's still standing intact in a very good position. One word about accessing the temple. When you plan to build such a massive project like Temple Mount in Jerusalem, you need to also consider very carefully the infrastructure. There'll be no point to build a place that could accommodate hundreds of thousands of people unless you provide them decent roads
and decent water reservoirs, and the temple had to have its own water system, and people need to be comfortable to walk up the mountains of Jerusalem, so you have to police the highways as well. It wasn't just the building. Maybe even the harbor in Caesarea was designed in order to accommodate more people and aspire to be the real center for the Jews around the world, because back in the days of Herod, the days of Jesus, about 50% of the Jewish population did not live in Judea. Yet,
stopping here for a minute, you heard me kind of catching my breath, huh? I'm an old man, climbing those, you really have to some effort. I do want to point to those stairs because they are important. Number one, most of them are authentic. The tradition was that pilgrims would enter from south. Anybody else that came for different reasons could choose one of the 8 gates to go up to Temple Mount. But if you came as a pilgrim, you always enter from south because of one main reason. The city was growing in the days of Herod to such an extent that from every direction that you approach the temple, you're walking down hills, and that's inappropriate. To go to the place of worship, going down hills, inappropriate. The one direction that you're climbing with your face lifted is coming from south, which made that the tradition. You enter from south. And on these stairs, when they brought baby Jesus from his dedication, Hannah from the tribe of Asher, remember, looked at the baby, recognizing him as the Messiah. And that's what Peter was teaching the crowds over there. Almost everything that happened in Jerusalem happened on the stairs of the temple. So just to climb that today and to stand in front of the wall, there are no gates anymore today. They were sealed, locked by the Muslims. But once upon a time, it led into a couple of gates like a stadium. You go into a tunnel, and then you find yourself in the courtyard of Temple Mount. That's how it looked like. 1994, a very famous guest came to visit Jerusalem, Neil Armstrong, you know the name. And as they showed him around the stairs, he said something that was very nice, and not too many people can say that on our planet. Although I walked on the moon, he said, this is more exciting. A nice comment to make, right? So today, with all the efforts and excavation, we can actually walk the streets of Jerusalem just like Jesus did, and all the hundreds of thousands that came to Jerusalem, either for pilgrimage or just for the daily routine. As we are leaving now those excavations, we are going to make our way into Temple Mount. And we'll do that kind of quickly. The Temple Mount is always kind of an experience. What stands on top of Temple Mount are the 2 Muslim holy places. The Dome of the Rock is the Golden Dome, believed to be the place for the ascension of Muhammad. I'll share that with you in a minute. And the other one is the Mosque of Al-Aqsa. As I mentioned, Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran, not even once. And the question is, what's the connection? Well, when the Muslims came out from the Arabian desert in a very short time, it was a smashing success. They were able to conquer a huge area, defeating in the process the mighty empires of the time. The Byzantines, which were the Roman Christians, and the Persians. The 2 empires were simply exhausted. After 500 years of constant war, totally exhausted, which made the Muslim job even easier. But for the first time ever, we have to say, people went to conquer the world because they were commanded in the scriptures to do so. That never happened before. Zeus never told Alexander the Great, conquer the world for me. And Jupiter did not order Caesar Augustus to conquer the world. It is in the Quran. You conquer the world for Allah. And this is a very strong motivation, as you understand. So a few circumstances led to an amazing success. And before not too long, the Muslim territories covered such a large area. There was no center, there was no way to administer everything. There was a problem. Because as a Muslim ruler, you can only rule from one place, Mecca. Now, let's be practical for a minute. The area is so big. Mecca is disconnected from everything. You cannot really govern an area from India to Morocco, the Atlantic Ocean, from Mecca. They needed a new center. They chose Damascus. Well, if a Muslim caliph is ruling from not Mecca but Damascus, you will be accused by your own people that you're not loyal to Islam. They needed to find a place which is close to Damascus that they can connect somehow with the Quran. Otherwise, they're going to lose their position as caliphs. And that was Jerusalem. Temple Mount was not in the hands of anybody. The ruins of the Jewish temple left behind by the Romans. It was a dump of Jerusalem. The question is, how do we make the connection? Chapter 17 in the Quran says the following, that God was taking Muhammad to the most remote area. Muhammad had ascended. There was a session up there attended by all the angels and all the prophets and all the others, and they all agreed that Muhammad has the updated version of God's word, all the others are lying, and the whole world should follow Muhammad. That's what the Quran teaches. And he came down back and carried on with his life. Well, the most remote area, where is that? Could be Lebanon, Pennsylvania. But no, they made the connection with Jerusalem because they needed to connect the place with the Quran. So that's what made the connection. And after Jerusalem was proclaimed to be a holy place, those shrines were built. The Golden Dome is a shrine, not a mosque, all right? It's basically protecting the rock they believe that Muhammad had descended from, and the other one will be the mosque for public prayers. That's how Temple Mount looks like today. Now, we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to take 7 minutes from your precious time, all right? And I owe you 7 minutes.
We're climbing the bridge, accessing Temple Mount. That's the only entrance for non-Muslims. Other gates are only open for Muslims to come through. And this is the time for visitors, the total separation between the Muslim worshippers that come to worship and tourists that come to view. Interesting angle from here, we can see the Western Wall Prayer Plaza, which is down below us. Always people by the Western Wall, always people praying. It's divided now to these little cloisters because of the coronavirus, but there's always somebody by the Western Wall. It's a Sunday today, so it's not a Bar Mitzvah day. It won't be as busy as usual. And the Western Wall is right in front of you. If we look to the other side, we'll be able to see some of the excavations which are outside the Western Wall. Nope, blocked right now. We're going to go through into the Western Wall area. Boker Tov, Boker Tov.
Right through the police checkpoints and the Muslim guards.
Entering Temple Mount. Boker Tov. It's going to be a quiet morning, no doubt. Not that many people show up these days. But this is by far the most important place on the planet for so many people.
You cannot take a Bible with you up there. They will not agree, the Muslims. You cannot take a tripod. They're watching very carefully
Heavy
what
police
business you bring
presence,
with you.
always. The Muslim guards are maintaining law and order among the Muslims, but their authority is really limited. Police is heavily invested on top of Temple Mount. All Israelis, by the way, to remind you, there was some confusion about who owns Temple Mount. But let me remind you, Israel is the sovereign, and Israeli police is the only one which is allowed to be up here carrying weapons and wearing uniforms. The Muslims have their own guards, but again, they don't have any kind of weapons they're wearing, so they're here just to be on the safe side. Used to be a time that they used to be very unpleasant to visitors, not anymore. Finally, Israel decided to start enforcing our authority on top here, so things are more quiet. You do see the stickers on the floor. This is for the Muslim worshippers, 2 meters between one and the other, as the Corona regulations dictate. And here the camera moves to focus on the Dome of the Rock, which is the third holiest place to Islam. It is their belief that the Prophet Muhammad had ascended from the rock which is inside the building for one night only, and this building was built 692 AD, and this is considered to be the third holiest place in the Muslim world. Ever since, here's a little fountain here. People are washing.
Okay, we are going to end the day, and I'm late already, by the Western Wall, so let me take you down to the Western Wall, and we are skipping some of the information. I apologize for that, but the clock is ticking. Come to Israel, we'll cover everything.
The Western Wall, which is behind me, is the holiest place for the Jewish people. It is not the wall of the temple, as some people think by mistake. It's a western retaining wall of Temple Mount. Over years, whatever was accessible for the Jewish people to come and practice, they would go. It wasn't always the Western Wall. Sometimes people had more flexibility to go to other walls, but the idea was to come as close as possible to the temple's location and to worship the God of Israel. Today, when the city is in Jewish hands, basically the state of Israel is sovereign, still on top of Temple Mount, nobody else is permitted to practice any kind of religious manifestations except for the Muslims. So the Western Wall is indeed the closest place we can come today to the Holy of Holies, and that will be the aspiration of every Jewish individual and the Jewish people as a nation. And therefore this will be a place which is not only for private prayer. Some of the big national events will take place also at the big plaza, just by the Western Wall. And this is exactly where the two aspects of being Jewish, nation and religion, will come together.
When I mentioned to you a couple of days ago that there are 3 places in the country that you need to visit and understand the message behind, I did mention Masada, that covers the national, and the Western Wall will cover the religious. I do need to emphasize that once again. The Western Wall is not the wall of the temple. All right? There was Mount Moriah, on top of which man-made Temple Mount, on top of which was the temple. But the way that the temple was arranged, so to speak, the back wall of the Holy of Holies was closer to the Western Wall than any other wall. The next lecture we're going to go to the model of Jerusalem from the days of Jesus. Then it's very clear to see how the temple is standing very close to the Western Wall. That's the only reason why people will go to the Western Wall to practice. Some people are really upset with the whole situation. Many people have been the opinion that finally it's a Jewish state. Finally, Jerusalem is our capital. How come that the holiest place for the Jewish people in a Jewish sovereign state is in Muslim hands? You can understand the question. You understand the frustration of some people. The answer would be that as a democracy, democracies are respecting the sanctuaries of other religions. And when in 1967 Israel liberated the whole of Jerusalem, it was an opportunity. The opportunity was not to take down the mosques and to build a temple, because as many people believe, only God knows the timing. And He doesn't need us to do His work. And therefore, He knows the timing, He knows when. We should only pray for it to happen. We should not take action. Maybe a skeptic approach, but that will be the approach of most of the Jewish people. We should not take action because only God knows the timing. To take it to the level of the state of Israel, it was an opportunity. We wanted to show to the Arab countries that you attacked us, we won the war, it's not a war of religion. Although we have Jerusalem, we'll leave you the right to pray on top of Temple Mount. We thought that this nice gesture will be so well appreciated, it will bring the religions closer, peace is going to prevail. I'm a little sarcastic. Duh, as you say in America, it didn't happen. Now we understand. All right, but now it's too late to change anything. So yes, the holiest place for the Jewish people in a sovereign Jewish capital is indeed in Muslim hands. This is the heart of all the tension and all the sentiments and all the problems. Everything that happens in the region around the Muslim world is not connected to Mecca anymore. All right? It's connected to Jerusalem. Why? Because the Jews have it. Until 1967, Temple Mount was a place of no significance, period. Nobody cared about it. We don't have any guests that came to visit, any big names, Temple Mount, because it was in Muslim hands. So who cares about Temple Mount? Now that we have it, as you understand, it gets all the attention, not just from the Muslim world, from the whole world. And some people say that Jews don't have any rights in Jerusalem anyhow, and Temple Mount was never Jewish. It was the Jebusite temple or something. Some people think like that, and who cares about the facts, all right? I made up my mind, don't let the facts confuse me. Okay, folks, this will be the end of second day in Jerusalem and the end of the afternoon session. So as I understand, we are back at 6, right, Pastor? Yeah. Thank you.
Did you feel like you've been getting a drink of water out of a fire?